With the Lady Jessica and Arrakis, the Bene Gesserit system of sowing implant legends through the Missionaria Protectiva came into its full fruition. The wisdom of seeding the known universe with a prophecy pattern for the protection of BG personnel has long been appreciated, but never have we seen a condition ad extremis with more ideal mating of person and preparation. The prophetic legends had taken on Arrakis even to the extent of adopted labels, including Reverend Mother, Canto, and Respondu, and most of the Sharia Panoplia Propheticus, and it is generally accepted now that the Lady Jessica's latent abilities were grossly underestimated. From analysis, The Arrakeen Crisis by the Princess Irulan, private circulation, BG, file number AR81088587. All around the Lady Jessica, piled in corners of the Arrakeen Great Hall, mounted in the open spaces, stood the packaged freight of their lives. Boxes, trunks, cartons, cases, some partly unpacked. She could hear the cargo handlers from the guild shuttle depositing another load in the entry. Jessica stood in the center of the hall. She moved in a slow turn, looking up and around at shadowed carvings, crannies, and deeply recessed windows. This giant anachronism of a room reminded her of the sisters' hall at her Bene Gesserit school. But at the school the effect had been of warmth. Here all was bleak stone. Some architect had reached far back into history for these buttressed walls and dark hangings, she thought. The arched ceiling stood 2 stories above her, with great crossbeams she felt sure had been shipped here to Arrakis across space at monstrous cost. No planet of this system grew trees to make such beams, unless the beams were imitation wood. She thought not. This had been the government mansion in the days of the old Empire. Costs had been of less importance then. It had been before the Harkonnens and their new megalopolis of Carthag, a cheap and brassy place some 200 kilometers northeast across the Broken Land. Leto had been wise to choose this place for his seat of government. The name, Arrakeen, had a good sound, filled with tradition, and this was a smaller city, easier to sterilize and defend. Again there came the clatter of boxes being unloaded in the entry. Jessica sighed. Against a curtain to her right stood the painting of the Duke's father. Wrapping twine hung from it like a frayed decoration. A piece of the twine was still clutched in Jessica's left hand. Beside the painting lay a black bull's head mounted on a polished board. The head was a dark island in a sea of wadded paper. Its plaque lay flat on the floor, and the bull's shiny muzzle pointed at the ceiling as though the beast were ready to bellow a challenge into this echoing room. Jessica wondered what compulsion had brought her to uncover those 2 things first, the head and the painting. She knew there was something symbolic in this action. Not since the day when the Duke's buyers had taken her from the school had she felt this frightened and unsure of herself. The head and the picture. They heightened her feelings of confusion. She shuddered, glanced at the slit windows high overhead. It was still early afternoon here, and in these latitudes the sky looked black and cold, so much darker than the warm blue of Caladan. A pang of homesickness throbbed through her. So far away, Caladan. Here we are! The voice was Duke Leto's. She whirled, saw him striding from the arched passage to the dining hall. His black working uniform with red armorial hawk crest at the breast looked dusty and rumpled. "I thought you might have lost yourself in this hideous place," he said. "It is a cold house," she said. She looked at his tallness, at the dark skin that made her think of olive groves and golden sun on blue waters. There was wood smoke in the grey of his eyes, but the face was predatory, thin, full of sharp angles and pains. A sudden fear of him tightened her breast. He had become such a savage, driving person since her decision to bow to the Emperor's command. "The whole city feels cold," she said. "It's a dirty, dusty little garrison town," he agreed, "but we'll change that." He looked around the hall. "These are public rooms for state occasions. I've just glanced at some of the family apartments in the south wing. They're much nicer." He stepped closer, touched her arm, admiring her stateliness. And again he wondered at her unknown ancestry. A renegade house, perhaps? Some black-barred royalty? She looked more regal than the Emperor's own blood. Under the pressure of his stare, she turned half away, exposing her profile, and he realized there was no single and precise thing that brought her beauty to focus. The face was oval under a cap of hair the color of polished bronze. Her eyes were set wide, as green and clear as the morning skies of Caladan. The nose was small, the mouth wide and generous. Her figure was good but scant, tall and with its curves gone to slimness. He remembered that the lay sisters at the school had called her skinny, so his buyers had told him, but that description was oversimplified. She had brought a regal beauty back into the Atreides line. He was glad that Paul favoured her. "Where's Paul?" he asked. "Someplace around the house taking his lessons of Yue." Probably in the south wing, he said. I thought I heard Yue's voice, but I couldn't take time to look. He glanced down at her, hesitating. I came here only to hang the key of Caladan Castle in the dining hall. She caught her breath, stopped the impulse to reach out to him. Hanging the key, there was finality in that action, but this was not the time or place for comforting. I saw our banner over the house as we came in, she said. He glanced at the painting of his father. Where were you going to hang that? Somewhere in here. No. The word rang flat and final, telling her she could use trickery to persuade, but an open argument was useless. Still, she had to try, even if the gesture served only to remind herself that she would not trick him. My lord, she said, if you'd only... The answer remains no. I indulge you shamefully in most things, not in this. I've just come from the dining hall where there are... My lord, please. The choice is between your digestion and my ancestral dignity, my dear, he said. They will hang in the dining hall. She sighed. Yes, my lord. You may resume your custom of dining in your rooms whenever possible. I shall expect you at your proper position only on formal occasions. Thank you, my lord. And don't go all cold and formal on me. Be thankful that I never married you, my dear. Then it'd be your duty to join me at table for every meal. She held her face immobile, nodded. Howard already has our own poisoned snooper over the dining table, he said. There's a portable in your room. You anticipated this disagreement, she said. My dear, I think also of your comfort. I've engaged servants. They're locals, but Howard has cleared them. They're Fremen all. They'll do until our own people can be released from their other duties. Can anyone from this place be truly safe? Anyone who hates Harkonnens? You may even want to keep the head housekeeper, the Shadout Mapes. Shadout, Jessica said. A Fremen title? I'm told it means well dipper, a meaning of rather important overtones here. She may not strike you as a servant type, although Howard speaks highly of her on the basis of Duncan's report. They're convinced she wants to serve, specifically that she wants to serve you. Me? The Fremen have learned that you're a Bene Gesserit, he said. There are legends here about the Bene Gesserit. Missionaria Protectiva, Jessica thought. No place escapes them. Does this mean Duncan was successful? She asked. Will the Fremen be our allies? There's nothing definite, he said. They wish to observe us for a while, Duncan believes. They did, however, promise to stop raiding our outlying villages during a truce period. That's a more important gain than it might seem. Howard tells me the Fremen were a deep thorn in the Harkonnen side, that the extent of their ravages was a carefully guarded secret. It wouldn't have helped for the Emperor to learn the ineffectiveness of the Harkonnen military. A Fremen housekeeper, Jessica mused, returning to the subject of the Shadout Mapes. She'll have the all-blue eyes. Don't let the appearance of these people deceive you, he said. There's a deep strength and healthy vitality in them. I think they'll be everything we need. It's a dangerous gamble, she said. Let's not go into that again, he said. She forced a smile. We are committed, no doubt of that. She went through the quick regimen of calmness, the 2 deep breaths, the ritual thought. Then, when I assign rooms, is there anything special I should reserve for you? You must teach me someday how you do that, he said. The way you thrust your worries aside and turn to practical matters. It must be a Bene Gesserit thing. It's a female thing, she said. He smiled. Well, assignment of rooms. Make certain I have large office space next to my sleeping quarters. There'll be more paperwork here than on Caladan. A guard room, of course. That should cover it. Don't worry about security of the house. Howard's men have been over it in depth. I'm sure they have. He glanced at his wristwatch. And you might see that all our timepieces are adjusted for Arakeen local. I've assigned a tech to take care of it. He'll be along presently. He brushed a strand of her hair back from her forehead. I must return to the landing field now. The second shuttle's due any minute with my staff reserves. Couldn't Howard meet them, my lord? You look so tired. The good Fufa is even busier than I am. You know this planet's infested of Harkonnen intrigues. Besides, I must try persuading some of the trained spice hunters against leaving. They have the option, you know, with the change of fief, and the planetologist, the Emperor, and the Lancerat installed as judge of the change cannot be bought. He's allowing the opt. About 800 trained hands expect to go out on the spice shuttle, and there's a guild cargo ship standing by. My lord, she broke off, hesitating. Yes? You will not be persuaded against trying to make this planet secure for us, she thought, and I cannot use my tricks on him. At what time will you be expecting dinner? She asked. That's not what she was going to ask, he thought. My Jessica, would that we were somewhere else, anywhere away from this terrible place, alone, the two of us, without a care. I'll eat in the officers' mess at the field, he said. Don't expect me until very late, and, I'll be sending a guard car for Paul. I want him to attend our strategy conference. He cleared his throat as though to say something else, then, without warning, turned and strode out, headed for the entry where she could hear more boxes being deposited. His voice sounded at once from there, commanding and disdainful, the way he always spoke to servants when he was in a hurry. "The Lady Jessica's in the great hall. Join her there immediately." The outer door slammed. Jessica turned away, faced the painting of Leto's father. It had been done by the famed artist, Alb, during the old Duke's middle years. He was portrayed in matador costume with a magenta cape flung over his left arm. The face looked young, hardly older than Leto's now, and with the same hawk features, the same grey stare. She clenched her fist at her sides, glared at the painting. "Damn you, damn you, damn you," she whispered. "What are your orders, noble born?" It was a woman's voice, thin and stringy. Jessica whirled, stared down at a knobbly grey-haired woman in a shapeless sack dress of bondsman brown. The woman looked as wrinkled and desiccated as any member of the mob that had greeted them along the way from the landing field that morning. Every native she had seen on this planet, Jessica thought, looked prune, dry, and undernourished. Yet Leto had said they were strong and vital. And there were the eyes, of course. That wash of deepest, darkest blue without any white. Secretive, mysterious, Jessica forced herself not to stare. The woman gave a stiff-necked nod, said, "I'm called the Shut-Up Mapes, noble born. What are your orders?" "You may refer to me as my lady," Jessica said. "I'm not noble born, and the bound concubine of the Duke Leto." Again that strange nod, and the woman peered upward at Jessica with a slight questioning. "There's a wife, then?" "There is not, nor has there ever been. I am the Duke's only companion, the mother of his heir designate." Even as she spoke, Jessica laughed inwardly at the pride behind her words. What was it St. Augustine said? She asked herself. The mind commands the body and it obeys. The mind orders itself and meets resistance. Yes, I'm meeting more resistance lately. I could use a quiet retreat by myself. A weird cry sounded from the road outside the house. It was repeated. "Su, su, sook, su, su, sook." Then, "Ikut a, and again, "Su, su, sook." "What is that?" Jessica asked. "I heard it several times as we drove through the streets this morning." "Only a water cellar, my lady, but you've no need to interest yourself in such as they. The cistern here holds 50,000 litres, and it's always kept full." She glanced down at her dress. "Why, you know, my lady, I don't even have to wear my still suit here." She cackled, "And me not even dead." Jessica hesitated, wanting to question this Fremen woman needing data to guide her, but bringing order out of the confusion in the castle was more imperative. Still, she found the thought unsettling that water was a major mark of wealth here. "My husband told me of your title, shout out," Jessica said. "I recognized the word. It's a very ancient word." "You know the ancient tongues, then?" Mapes asked, and she waited with an odd intensity. "Tongues are the Bene Gesserit's first learning," Jessica said. "I know the Botani Jib and the Chakopsa, all the hunting languages." Maps nodded, just as the legend says, and Jessica wondered, why do I play out this sham? But the Bene Gesserit ways were devious and compelling. "I know the dark things in the ways of the Great Mother," Jessica said. She read the more obvious signs in Map's action and appearance, the petite betrayals. "Mrs. Pregia," she said in the Chakobsa tongue. "Andral tre pera, trada sic buskakiri, Mrs. Peracri." Mapes took a backward step, appeared poised to flee. "I know many things," Jessica said. "I know that you have borne children, that you have lost loved ones, that you have hidden in fear, and that you have done violence and will yet do more violence. I know many things." In a low voice, Mapes said, "I meant no offence, my lady. You speak of the legend and seek answers," Jessica said. "Beware the answers you may find. I know you came prepared for violence with a weapon in your bodies." "My lady, there's a remote possibility you could draw my life's blood," Jessica said. "But in doing so you'd bring down more ruin than your wildest fears could imagine. There are worse things than dying, you know, even for an entire people." "My lady," Mapes pleaded. She appeared about to fall on her knees. "The weapon was sent as a gift to you should you prove to be the one." "And as the means of my death should I prove otherwise," Jessica said. She waited in the seeming relaxation that made the Bene Gesserit trained so terrifying in combat. "Now we see which way the decision tips," she thought. Slowly Maps reached into the neck of her dress, brought out a dark sheath. A black handle with deep finger ridges protruded from it. She took sheath in one hand and handle in the other, withdrew a milk-white blade, held it up. The blade seemed to shine and glitter with a light of its own. It was double-edged like a kinjal, and the blade was perhaps 20 centimeters long. "Do you know this, my lady?" Mapes asked. It could only be one thing, Jessica knew. The fabled Cry's knife of Arrakis, a blade that had never been taken off the planet, and was known only by rumor and wild gossip. "It's a Cry's knife," she said. "Say it not lightly," Mapes said. "Do you know its meaning?" And Jessica thought, there was an edge to that question. Here's the reason this Fremen has taken service of me, to ask that one question. My answer could precipitate violence, or what? She seeks an answer from me, the meaning of a knife. She's called the Shadout in the Chekhovsa tongue. Knife, that's Deathmaker in Chekhovsa. She's getting restive. I must answer now. Delay is as dangerous as the wrong answer. Jessica said, "It's a maker." "Aye!" Mapes wailed. It was a sound of grief and elation. She trembled so hard the knife blade sent glittering shards of reflection shooting around the room. Jessica waited, poised. She had intended to say the knife was a maker of death and then add the ancient word, but every sense warned her now, all the deep training of alertness had exposed meaning in the most casual muscle twitch. The key word was maker. Maker? Maker. Still, Mapes held the knife as though ready to use it. Jessica said, "Did you think that I, knowing the mysteries of the Great Mother, would not know the Maker?" Mapes lowered the knife. "My lady, when one has lived with prophecy for so long, the moment of revelation is a shock." Jessica thought about the prophecy, the Sharia, and all the Panoplia propheticus. Bene Gesserit of the mission area protectiva dropped here long centuries ago, long dead no doubt, but her purpose accomplished, the protective legends implanted in these people against the day of a Bene Gesserit's need. Well, that day had come. Mapes returned knife to sheath, said, "This is an unfixed blade, my lady. Keep it near you. More than a week away from flesh and it begins to disintegrate. It's yours, a tooth of Shai Hulud, for as long as you live." Jessica reached out her right hand, wrist to gamble. "Mapes, you've sheathed that blade unblooded." With a gasp, Mapes dropped the sheathed knife into Jessica's hand, tore open the brown bodice, wailing, "Take the water of my life." Jessica withdrew the blade from its sheath. How it glittered. She directed the point toward Mapes, saw a fear greater than death panic come over the woman. Poison in the point? Jessica wondered. She tipped up the point, drew a delicate scratch of the blade's edge above Mapes' left breast. There was a thick welling of blood that stopped almost immediately. Ultra-fast coagulation, Jessica thought. A moisture-conserving mutation? She sheathed the blade, said, "Button your dress, Mapes." Mapes obeyed, trembling. The eyes of her white stared at Jessica. "You are ours," she muttered. "You are the one." There came another sound of unloading in the entry. Swiftly, Mapes grabbed the sheathed knife, concealed it in Jessica's bodice. "Who sees that knife must be cleansed or slain," she snarled. "You know that, my lady." "I know it now," Jessica thought. The cargo handlers left without intruding on the great hall. Mapes composed herself. She said, "The uncleansed who have seen a Cry's knife may not leave Arrakis alive. Never forget that, my lady. You've been entrusted with a Cry's knife." She took a deep breath. Now the thing must take its course. It cannot be hurried. She glanced at the stacked boxes and piled goods around them. "And there's work aplenty to while the time for us here." Jessica hesitated. The thing must take its course. That was a specific catchphrase from the mission area protective stock of incantations. The coming of the Reverend Mother to free you. But I'm not a Reverend Mother, Jessica thought. And then, Great Mother, they planted that one here. This must be a hideous place. In matter-of-fact tones, Mapes said, "What you'll be wanting me to do first, my lady." Instinct warned Jessica to match that casual tone. She said, "The painting of the old Duke over there. It must be hung on one side of the dining hall. The bull's head must go on the wall opposite the painting." Mapes crossed to the bull's head. "What a great beast it must have been to carry such a head," she said. She stooped. "I'll have to be cleaning this first, won't I, my lady?" "No, but there's dirt caked on its horns." "That's not dirt, Mapes. That's the blood of our Duke's father. Those horns were sprayed with a transparent fixative within hours after this beast killed the old Duke." Mapes stood up. "Ah, now," she said. "It's just blood," Jessica said. "Old blood at that. Get some help hanging these now. The beastly things are heavy." "Did you think that blood bothered me?" Mapes asked. "I'm of the desert, and I've seen blood aplenty. I—" "See that you have," Jessica said. "And some of it my own," Mapes said. "More than you drew with your puny scratch. You'd rather I'd cut deeper?" "Ah, no. The body's water is scant enough without gushing a wasteful lot of it into the air. You did the thing right." and Jessica, noting the words and manner, caught the deeper implications in the phrase, "the body's water." Again she felt a sense of oppression at the importance of water on Arrakis. "On which side of the dining hall shall I hang which one of these pretties, my lady?" Mapes asked. "Ever the practical one, this Mapes," Jessica thought. She said, "Use your own judgment, Mapes. It makes no real difference." "As you say, my lady." Mapes stooped, began clearing wrappings entwined from the head. "Killed an old duke, did you?" she crooned. "Shall I summon a handler to help you?" Jessica asked. "I'll manage, my lady." Yes, she'll manage, Jessica thought. There's that about this Fremen creature, the drive to manage. Jessica felt the cold sheath of the cry's knife beneath her bodice, thought of the long chain of Bene Gesserit scheming that had forged another link here. Because of that scheming, she had survived a deadly crisis. "It cannot be hurried," Mapes had said. Yet there was a tempo of headlong rushing to this place that filled Jessica with foreboding, and not all the preparations of the Missionaria Protectiva nor Howard's suspicious inspection of this castellated pile of rocks could dispel the feeling. "When you finish hanging those, start unpacking the boxes," Jessica said. "One of the cargo men at the entry has all the keys and knows where things should go. Get the keys and the list from him. If there are any questions, I'll be in the south wing." "As you will, my lady," Mapes said. Jessica turned away, thinking, Howard may have passed this residency as safe, but there's something wrong about the place. I can feel it. An urgent need to see her son gripped Jessica. She began walking toward the arched doorway that led into the passage to the dining hall and the family wings. Faster and faster she walked until she was almost running. Behind her, Mapes paused in clearing the wrappings from the bull's head, looked at the retreating back. "She's the one, all right," she muttered. "Poor thing." "Ewer, Ewer, Ewer," goes the refrain. "A million deaths are not enough for Ewer." From A Child's History of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. The door stood ajar, and Jessica stepped through it into a room with yellow walls. To her left stretched a low settee of black hide and two empty bookcases, a hanging water flask with dust on its bulging sides. To her right, bracketing another door, stood more empty bookcases, a desk from Caladan, and 3 chairs. At the windows directly ahead of her stood Dr. Yueh, her back to her, his attention fixed upon the outside world. Jessica took another silent step into the room. She saw that Yueh's coat was wrinkled, a white smudge near the left elbow as though he had leaned against chalk. He looked from behind, like a fleshless stick figure in overlarge black clothing, a caricature poised for stringy movement at the direction of a puppet master. Only the squarish block of head with long ebony hair caught in its silver silk school ring at the shoulder seemed alive, turning slightly to follow some movement outside. Again she glanced around the room, seeing no sign of her son, but the closed door on her right, she knew, led into a small bedroom for which Paul had expressed a liking. "Good afternoon, Dr. Yueh," she said. "Where's Paul?" He nodded as though to something out the window, spoke in an absent manner without turning. "Your son grew tired, Jessica. I sent him into the next room to rest." Abruptly he stiffened, whirled with moustache flopping over his purpled lips. "Forgive me, my lady. My thoughts are far away. I did not mean to be familiar." She smiled, held out her right hand. For a moment she was afraid he might kneel. "Wellington, please. To use your name like that. We've known each other 6 years," she said. "It's long past time formalities should have been dropped between us. In private." Yueh ventured a thin smile, thinking, "I believe it has worked. Now she'll think anything unusual in my manner is due to embarrassment. She'll not look for deeper reasons when she believes she already knows the answer." "I'm afraid I was wool-gathering," he said. "Whenever I feel especially sorry for you, I'm afraid I think of you as, well, Jessica." "Sorry for me? Whatever for?" Yueh shrugged. Long ago he had realized Jessica was not gifted with the full truth-say as his Wana had been. Still, he always used the truth with Jessica whenever possible. It was safest. "You've seen this place, my Jessica." He stumbled over the name, plunged ahead. "So barren after Caladan. And the people. Those townswomen we passed on the way here, wailing beneath their veils. The way they looked at us." She folded her arms across her breast, hugging herself, feeling the cry's knife there, a blade ground from a sandworm's tooth, if the reports were right. "It's just that we're strange to them, different people, different customs. They've known only the Harkonnens." She looked past him out the windows. "What were you staring at out there?" He turned back out to the window. "The people." Jessica crossed to his side, looked to the left toward the front of the house where Yueh's attention was focused. A line of 20 palm trees grew there, the ground beneath them swept clean and barren. A screen fence separated them from the road upon which robed people were passing. Jessica detected a faint shimmering in the air between her and the people, a house shield, and went on to study the passing throng, wondering why Yueh found them so absorbing. The pattern emerged and she put her hand to her cheek. The way the passing people looked at the palm trees, she saw envy, some hate, even a sense of hope. Each person raked those trees with a fixity of expression. Do you know what they're thinking? Yua asked. You profess to read minds? She asked. Those minds, he said. They look at those trees and they think, there are 100 of us. That's what they think. She turned a puzzled frown on him. Why? Those are date palms, he said. One date palm requires 40 litres of water a day. Man requires but 8 litres. A palm, then, equals 5 men. There are 20 palms out there. 100 men. But some of those people look at the trees, hopefully. They but hope some dates will fall, except it's the wrong season. We look at this place with too critical an eye, she said. There's hope as well as danger here. The spice could make us rich. We have a fat treasury who can make this world into whatever we wish. And she laughed silently at herself. Who am I trying to convince? The laugh broke through her restraints, emerging brittle, without humour. But you can't buy security, she said. Hugh had turned away to hide his face from her. If only it were possible to hate these people instead of love them. In her manner, in many ways, Jessica was like his Wana. Yet that thought carried its own rigours, hardening him to his purpose. The ways of the Harkonnen cruelty were devious. Wana might not be dead. He had to be certain. Do not worry for us, Wellington, Jessica said. The problem's ours, not yours. She thinks I worry for her. He blinked back tears. And I do, of course, but I must stand before that Black Baron with his deed accomplished, and take my one chance to strike him then where he is weakest, in his gloating moment. He sighed. Would it disturb Paul if I looked in on him? She asked. Not at all. I gave him a sedative. He's taking the change well? She asked. Except for getting a bit overtired. He's excited, but what 15-year-old wouldn't be under these circumstances? He crossed to the door, opened it. He's in here. Jessica followed, peered into a shadowy room. Paul lay on a narrow cot, one arm beneath a light cover, the other thrown back over his head. Slatted blinds at a window beside the bed wove a loom of shadows across face and blanket. Jessica stared at her son, seeing the oval shape of face so like her own. But the hair was the Duke's, coal-coloured and tasselled. Long lashes concealed the lime-toned eyes. Jessica smiled, feeling her tears retreat. She was suddenly caught by the idea of genetic traces in her son's features. Her lines in eyes and facial outline, but sharp touches of the father peering through that outline like maturity emerging from childhood. She thought of the boy's features as an exquisite distillation out of random patterns, endless cues of happenstance meeting at this nexus. The thought made her want to kneel beside the bed and take her son in her arms, but she was inhibited by Ewan's presence. She stepped back, closed the door softly. Ewan had returned to the window, unable to bear watching the way Jessica stared at her son. Why did Wana never give me children? He asked himself. I know as a doctor there was no physical reason against it. Was there some Bene Gesserit reason? Was she perhaps instructed to serve a different purpose? What could it have been? She loved me, certainly. For the first time he was caught up in the thought that he might be part of a pattern more involuted and complicated than his mind could grasp. Jessica stopped beside him, said, What delicious abandon in the sleep of a child. He spoke mechanically. If only adults could relax like that. Yes. Where do we lose it? He murmured. She glanced at him, catching the odd tone, but her mind was still on Paul, thinking of the new rigours in his training here, thinking of the differences in his life now, so very different from the life they once had planned for him. We do indeed lose something, she said. She glanced out to the right of it at a slope humped with a wind-troubled grey-green of bushes, dusty leaves and dry claw branches. The too dark sky hung over the slope like a blot, and the milky light of the Arakeen sun gave the scene a silver cast, light like the cry's knife concealed in her bodies. The sky's so dark, she said. That's partly the lack of moisture, he said. Water, she snapped. Everywhere you turn here you're involved with the lack of water. It's the precious mystery of Arrakis, he said. Why is there so little of it? There's volcanic rock here. There are a dozen power sources I could name. There's polar ice. They say you can't drill in the desert. Storms and sand tides destroy equipment faster than it can be installed, if the worms don't get you first. They've never found water traces there anyway. But the mystery, Wellington, the real mystery is the wells that have been drilled up here in the sinks and basins. Have you read about those? First a trickle, then nothing, he said. But Wellington, that's the mystery. The water was there. It dries up, and never again is there water. Yet another hole nearby produces the same result. A trickle that stops. Has no one ever been curious about this? It is curious, he said. You suspect some living agency? Wouldn't that have shown in core samples? What would have shown? Alien plant matter? Or animal? Who could recognize it? She turned back to the slope. The water is stopped. Something plugs it. That's my suspicion. Perhaps the reason's known, he said. The Harkonnens sealed off many sources of information about Arrakis. Perhaps there was a reason to suppress this. What reason? She asked. Then there's the atmospheric moisture. Little enough of it, certainly, but there's some. It's the major source of water here, caught in wind traps and precipitators. Where does that come from? The polar caps? Cold air takes up little moisture, Wellington. There are things here behind the Harkonnen Veil that bear close investigation. Not all of those things are directly involved with the spice. We are indeed behind the Harkonnen Veil, he said. Perhaps we'll... He broke off, noting the sudden intense way she was looking at him. Is something wrong? The way you say Harkonnen, she said. Even my Duke's voice doesn't carry that weight of venom when he uses the hated name. I didn't know you had personal reasons to hate them, Wellington. Great mother, he thought. I've aroused her suspicions. Now I must use every trick my Wana taught me. There's only one solution. Tell the truth as far as I can. He said, You didn't know my wife, my Wana. He shrugged, unable to speak past a certain constriction in his throat. Then, the words would not come out. He felt panic, closed his eyes tightly, experiencing the agony in his chest and little else, till a hand touched his arm gently. Forgive me, Jessica said. I did not mean to open an old wound. And she thought, those animals. His wife was Bene Gesserit. The signs are all over him. It's obvious the Harkonnens killed her. Here's another poor victim bound to the Atreides by a cherub of hate. I am sorry, he said. I'm unable to talk about it. He opened his eyes, giving himself up to the internal awareness of grief. That, at least, was truth. Jessica studied him, seeing the up-angled cheeks, the dark sequins of almond eyes, the butter complexion and stringy moustache hanging like a curved frame around purpled lips and narrow chin. The creases of his cheeks and forehead, she saw, were as much lines of sorrow as of age. A deep affection for him came over her. Wellington, I'm sorry we brought you into this dangerous place, she said. I came willingly, he said, and that, too, was true. But this whole planet's a Harkonnen trap. You must know that. It will take more than a trap to catch the Duke Leto, he said, and that, too, was true. Perhaps I should be more confident of him, she said. He is a brilliant tactician. We've been uprooted, he said. That's why we're uneasy. How easy it is to kill the uprooted plant, she said, especially when you put it down in hostile soil. Are we certain the soil's hostile? There are water rights, and it was learned how many people the Duke was adding to the population, she said. They stopped only when the people learned we were installing new wind traps and condensers to take care of the load. There is only so much water to support human life here, he said. The people know if more come to drink a limited amount of water, the price goes up and the very poor die. But the Duke has solved this. It doesn't follow that the riots mean permanent hostility toward him. And guards, she said. Guards everywhere. And shields. You see the blurring of them everywhere you look. We did not live this way on Caladan. Give this planet a chance, he said. But Jessica continued to stare hard-eyed out the window. I can smell death in this place, she said. Howard sent advance agents in here by the battalion. Those guards outside are his men. The cargo handlers are his men. There have been unexplained withdrawals of large sums from the treasury. The amounts mean only one thing. Bribes in high places. She shook her head. Where food for Howard goes, death and deceit follow. You malign him. Malign? I praise him. Death and deceit are our only hopes now. I just do not fool myself about Fufa's methods. You should keep busy, he said. Give yourself no time for such morbid. Busy? What is it that takes most of my time, Wellington? I am the Duke's secretary, so busy that each day I learn new things to fear. Things even he doesn't suspect, I know. She compressed her lips, spoke thinly. Sometimes I wonder how much my Bene Gesserit business training figured in this choice of mine. What do you mean? Found himself caught by the cynical tone, the bitterness that he had never seen her expose. Don't you think, Wellington, she asked, that a secretary bound to one by love is so much safer? That is not a worthy thought, Jessica. The rebuke came naturally to his lips. There was no doubt how the Duke felt about his concubine. One had only to watch him as he followed her with his eyes. She sighed. You're right. It's not worthy. Again she hugged herself, pressing the sheathed cries knife against her flesh and thinking of the unfinished business it represented. There'll be much bloodshed soon, she said. The Harkonnens won't rest until they're dead or my Duke destroyed. The Baron cannot forget that Leto is the cousin of the royal blood, no matter what the distance, while the Harkonnen titles came out of the Chowan pocketbook. But the poison in him, deep in his mind, is the knowledge that an Atreides had a Harkonnen banished for cowardice after the Battle of Corran. The old feud, Ewan muttered, and for a moment he felt an acid touch of hate. The old feud had trapped him in its web, killed his Wana, or worse, left her for Harkonnen tortures until her husband did their bidding. The old feud had trapped him, and these people were part of that poisonous thing. The irony was that such deadliness should come to flower here on Arrakis, the one source in the knowledge in the universe of melange, the prolonger of life, the giver of health. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking that the spice brings 620,000 sol hours per decagram on the open market right now. That is wealth to buy many things." "Does greed touch even you, Wellington?" "Not greed." "What then?" He shrugged. "Futility." He glanced at her. "Can you remember your first taste of spice? It tasted like cinnamon, but never twice the same," he said. "It's like life. It presents a different face each time you take it. Some hold that the spice produces a learned flavor reaction. The body, learning a thing is good for it, interprets the flavor as pleasurable, slightly euphoric, and like life, never to be truly synthesized. "I think it would have been wise for us to go renegade, to take ourselves beyond the Imperial reach," she said. He saw that she hadn't been listening to him, focused on her words, wondering, yes, why didn't she make him do this? She could make him do virtually anything. He spoke quickly because here was truth and a change of subject. "Would you think it bold of me, Jessica, if I asked a personal question?" She pressed against the window ledge in an unexplainable pang of disquiet. "Of course not. You're my friend. Why haven't you made the Duke marry you?" She whirled up, head up, glaring. "Made him marry me? But I should not have asked," he said. "No," she shrugged. "There's good political reason. As long as my Duke remains unmarried, some of the great houses can still hope for alliance. And," she sighed, "motivating people, forcing them to your will, gives you a cynical attitude toward humanity. It degrades everything it touches. If I made him do this, then it would not be my doing." "It's a thing my Wana might have said," he murmured. And this too was truth. He put a hand in his mouth, swallowing convulsively. He had never been closer to speaking out, confessing his secret role. Jessica spoke, shattering the moment. "Besides, Wellington, the Duke is really two men. One of them I love very much. He's charming, witty, considerate, tender, everything a woman could desire. But the other man is cold, callous, demanding, selfish, as harsh and cruel as a winter wind. That's the man shaped by the father." Her face contorted. "If only that old man had died when my Duke was born." In the silence that came between them, a breeze from a ventilator could be heard fingering the blinds. Presently she took a deep breath, said, "Leto's right. These rooms are nicer than the ones in the other sections of the house." She turned, sweeping the room with her gaze. "If you'll excuse me, Wellington, I want another look through this wing before I assign quarters." He nodded. Of course, and he thought, if only there were some way not to do this thing that I must do. Jessica dropped her arms, crossed to the hall door, and stood there a moment, hesitating, then let herself out. All the time we talked he was hiding something, holding something back, she thought, to save my feelings, no doubt. He's a good man. Again she hesitated, almost turned back to confront Yui and drag the hidden thing from him. But that would only shame him, frighten him to learn he so easily read. I should place more trust in my friends. Many have marked the speed with which Muad'Dib learned the necessities of Arrakis, but the Bene Gesserit, of course, know the basis of this speed. For the others, we can say that Muad'Dib learned rapidly because his first training was in how to learn, and the first lesson of all was the basic trust that he could learn. It is shocking to find how many people do not believe they can learn, and how many more believe learning to be difficult. Muad'Dib knew that every experience carries its lessons. From The Humanity of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. Paul lay on the bed feigning sleep. It had been easy to palm Dr. Yui's sleeping tablet, to pretend to swallow it. Paul suppressed a laugh. Even his mother had believed him asleep. He had wanted to jump up and ask her permission to go exploring the house, but had realized she wouldn't approve. Things were too unsettled yet. No, this way was best. If I slip out without asking, I haven't disobeyed orders, and I will stay in the house where it's safe. He heard his mother and Yui talking in the other room. Their words were indistinct. Something about the spice, the Harkonnens. The conversation rose and fell. Paul's attention went to the carved headboard of his bed, a false headboard attached to the wall and concealing the controls for this room's functions. A leaping fish had been shaped on the wood with thick brown waves beneath it. He knew if he'd pushed the fish's one visible eye that would turn on the room's dispenser lamps. One of the waves, when twisted, controlled ventilation. Another changed the temperature. Quietly, Paul sat up in bed. A tall bookcase stood against the wall to his left. It could be swung aside to reveal a closet with drawers along one side. The handle on the door into the hall was patterned on an ornithopter frost bar. It was as though the room had been designed to entice him. The room on this planet. He thought of the film book Yua had shown him, Arrakis, His Imperial Majesty's Desert Botanical Testing Station. It was an old film book from before discovery of the spice. Names flitted through Paul's mind, each of its picture imprinted by the book's mnemonic pulse. Seguro, burrowbush, date palm, sen, verbena, evening primrose, barrel cactus, incense bush, smoke tree, creosote bush, Kit, fox, desert hawk, kangaroo, mouse. Names and pictures from man's tyrannic past, and many to be found now nowhere else in the universe except here on Arrakis. So many new things to learn about. The spice and the sandworms. A door closed in the other room. Paul heard his mother's footsteps retreating down the hall. Dr. Yui, he knew, would find something to read and remain in the other room. Now was the moment to go exploring. Paul slipped out of the bed, headed for the bookcase door that opened into the closet. He stopped at a sound behind him, turned. The carved headboard of the bed was folding down onto the spot where he had been sleeping. Paul froze, and immobility saved his life. From behind the headboard slipped a tiny hunter-seeker no more than 5 centimeters long. Paul recognized it at once, a common assassination weapon that every child of royal blood learned about at an early age. It was a ravening silver of metal guided by some nearby hand and eye. It could burrow into moving flesh and chew its way up nerve channels to the nearest vital organ. The seeker lifted, swung sideways across the room and back. Though Paul's mind flashed the related knowledge, the hunter-seeker's limitations, its compressed suspensor field distorted the vision of its transmitter eye. With nothing but the dim light of the room to reflect his target, the operator would be relying on motion, anything that moved. A shield could slow a hunter, give time to destroy it. Paul had put aside his shield on the bed. Lasguns would knock them down, but lasguns were expensive and notoriously cranky of maintenance, and there was always the peril of explosive pyrotechnics if the laser beam intersected a hot shield. His tradies relied on their body shields and their wits. Now Paul held himself in a near catatonic immobility, knowing he had only his wits to meet this threat. The hunter-seeker lifted another half-meter. It rippled through the slatted light from the window blinds, back and forth, quartering the room. I must try to grab it, he thought. The suspensor field will make it slippery on the bottom. I must grip tightly. The thing dropped a half-meter, quartered to the left, circled back around the bed. A faint humming could be heard from it. Who is operating that thing? Paul wondered. It has to be someone near. I could shout for Ewer, but it would take him the instant. The door opened. The hall door behind Paul creaked. A rap sounded there. The door opened. The hunter-seeker arrowed past his head toward the motion. Paul's right hand shot out and down, gripping the deadly thing. It hummed and twisted in his hand, but his muscles were locked on it in desperation. With a violent turn and thrust, he slammed the thing's nose against the metal door plate. He felt the crunch of it as the nose eye smashed and the seeker went dead in his hand. Still, he held it, to be certain. Paul's eyes came up to meet the open stare of total blue from the shut-out maps. Your father has sent for you, she said. There are men in the hall to escort you. Paul nodded, his eyes in awareness focusing on this odd woman in a sack-like dress of bondsman brown. She was looking out at the thing clutched in his hand. I've heard of such like, she said. It would have killed me, not so? He had to swallow before he could speak. I was its target. But it was coming for me, because you were moving, and he wondered, who is this creature? Then you saved my life, she said. I saved both our lives. Seems like you could have let it have me and made your own escape, she said. Who are you? He asked. The shut-up Mapes, housekeeper. How did you know where to find me? Your mother told me. I met her at the stairs up to the weirding room down the hall. She pointed to her right. Your father's men are waiting. Those would be Howard's men, he thought. We must find the operator of this thing. Go to my father's men, he said. Tell them I've caught a hunter-seeker in the house and is to spread out and find the operator. Tell them to seal off the house and its grounds immediately. They'll know how to go about it. The operator's sure to be a stranger among us. And he wondered, could it be this creature? But he knew it wasn't. The seeker had been under control when she entered. Before I do your bidding, Manling, Mapes said, I must cleanse the way between us. You've put a water burden on me that I'm not sure I care to support. There'll be Fremen pay our debts, be they black debts or white debts, and it's known to us that you have a traitor in your midst. Who it is we cannot say. We're certain sure of it. Mayhap there's the hand guided that flesh-cutter. Paul absorbed this in silence. A traitor. Before he could speak, the old woman whirled away and ran back toward the entry. He thought to call her back, but there was an air about her that told him she would resent it. She'd told him what she knew, and now she was going to do his bidding. The house would be swarming of Howard's men in a minute. His mind went to other parts of that strange conversation. Weirding room. He looked to his left where she had pointed. We Fremen. So that was a Fremen. He paused for the mnemonic blink that would store the pattern of her face in his memory. Prune-wrinkled features, darkly browned, blue-on-blue eyes, without any white in them. He attached the label, the Shout-Out Mapes. Still gripping the shattered seeker, Paul turned back into his room, scooped up his shield belt from the bed with his left hand, swung it around his waist, and buckled it as he ran back out and down the hall to the left. She said his mother was someplace down here. Stairs. A weirding room. What had the Lady Jessica to sustain her in her time of trial? Finger you carefully on this Bene Gesserit proverb, and perhaps you will see. Any road followed precisely to its end leads precisely nowhere. Climb the mountain just a little bit to test that it's a mountain. From the top of the mountain, you cannot see the mountain. From Muad'Dib, Family Commentaries by the Princess Irulan. At the end of the south wing, Jessica found a metal stair spiraling up to an oval door. She glanced back down the hall, again up at the door. Oval, she wondered. What an odd shape for a door in a house. Through the windows beneath the spiral stair, she could see the great white sun of Arrakis moving on toward evening. Long shadows stabbed down the hall. She returned her attention to the stairs. Harsh side lighting picked up bits of dried earth on the open metalwork of the steps. Jessica put her hand on the rail, began to climb. The rail felt cold under her sliding palm. She stopped at the door, saw it had no handle, but there was a faint depression on the surface of it where a handle should have been. Surely not a palm lock, she told herself. A palm lock must be keyed to one individual's hand shape and palm lines, but it looked like a palm lock. And there were ways to open any palm lock, as she had learned at school. Jessica glanced back to make certain she was unobserved, placed her palm against a depression in the door, the most gentle of pressures to distort the lines, a turn of the wrist, an upper turn, a sliding twist of the palm across the surface. She felt the click, but there were hurrying footsteps in the hall beneath her. Jessica lifted her hand from the door, turned, saw Mapes come to the foot of the stairs. There are men in the great hall, say they've been sent by the Duke to get young Master Paul, Mapes said. They have the ducal signet, and the guard has identified them. She glanced at the door, back to Jessica. A cautious one, this Mapes, Jessica thought. That's a good sign. He's in the 5th room from this end of the hall, the small bedroom, Jessica said. If you have trouble waking him, call on Dr. Dewey in the next room. Paul may require a wake shot. Again, Mapes cast a piercing stare at the oval door. Jessica thought she detected loathing in the expression. Before Jessica could ask about the door and what it concealed, Mapes had turned away, hurrying back down the hall. How it certified this place, Jessica thought. There can't be anything too terrible in here. She pushed the door. It swung inward onto a small room with another oval door opposite. The other door had a wheel handle. An airlock, Jessica thought. She glanced down and saw a door prop fall into the floor of the little room. The prop carried Howard's personal mark. The door was left propped open, she thought. Someone probably knocked the prop down accidentally, not realizing the outer door would close on a palm lock. She stepped over the lip into the little room. Why an airlock in a house? She asked herself, and she thought suddenly of exotic creatures sealed off in special climates. Special climate? That would make sense on Arrakis, where even the driest of off-planet growing things had to be irrigated. The door behind her began swinging closed. She caught it and propped it open securely with the stick Howard had left. Again she faced the wheel-locked inner door, seeing now a faint inscription etched in the metal above the handle. She recognized Galak words, read, "O man, here is a lovely portion of God's creation. Then stand before it and learn to love the perfection of thy supreme friend." Jessica put her weight on the wheel, turned left, and the inner door opened. A gentle draught feathered her cheek, stirred her hair. She felt change in the air, a richer taste. She swung the door wide, looked through into massed greenery with yellow sunlight pouring across it. A yellow sun? She asked herself. Then, filter glass. She stepped over the sill and the door swung closed behind. A wet planet conservatory, she breathed. Potted plants and low-pruned trees stood all about. She recognized a mimosa, a flowering quince, a sondagi, green-blossomed planicenta, green and white-striped acaso, roses, even roses. She bent to breathe the fragrance of a giant pink blossom, strengthened to peer around the room. Rhythmic noise invaded her senses. She parted the jungle overlapping of leaves, looked through to the center of the room. A low fountain stood there, small with fluted lips. The rhythmic noise was appealing, spooling arc of water falling far to gallop onto the metal bowl. Jessica sent herself through the quick sense-clearing regimen, began a methodical inspection of the room's perimeter. It appeared to be about 10 meters square. From its placement above the end of the hall and from subtle differences in construction, she guessed it had been added onto the roof of this wing long after the original building's completion. She stopped at the south limits of the room in front of the wide reach of filter glass, stared around. Every available space in the room was crowded with exotic wet climate plants. Something rustled in the greenery. She tensed when glimpsed a small clock-set servock with pipe and hose arms. An arm lifted, sent out a fine spray of dampness that misted her cheeks. The arm retracted and she looked at what it had watered. A fern tree. Water everywhere in this room, on a planet where water was the most precious juice of life. Water being wasted so conspicuously that it shocked her to inner stillness. She glanced out at the yellow, filter-yellowed sun. It hung low on a jagged horizon above cliffs that formed part of the immense rock uplifting known as the Shield Wall. Filter glass, she thought. to turn a white sun into something softer and more familiar. Who could have built such a place? Leto? It would be like him to surprise me with such a gift, but there hasn't been time, and he's been busy with more serious problems. She recalled the report that many Arakeen houses were sealed by airlock doors and windows to conserve and reclaim interior moisture. Leto had said it was a deliberate statement of power and wealth for this house to ignore such precautions, its doors and windows being sealed only against the omnipresent dust. But this room embodied a statement far more significant than the lack of water seals and outer doors. She estimated that this pleasure room used water enough to support 1,000 persons on Arrakis, possibly more. Jessica moved along the window, continuing to stare into the room. The move brought into view a metallic surface at table height beside the fountain, and she glimpsed a white notepad and stylus there, partly concealed by an overhanging fan leaf. She crossed to the table, noted Howard's day signs on it, studied a message written on the pad. To Lady Jessica, may this place give you as much pleasure as it has given me. Please permit the room to convey a lesson we learned from the same teachers. The proximity of a desirable thing tempts one to overindulgence. On that path lies danger. My kindest wishes, Margot Lady Fenring. Jessica nodded, remembering that Leto had referred to the Empress' former proxy here as Count Fenring, but the hidden message of the note demanded immediate attention, couched as it was in a way to inform her the writer was another Bene Gesserit. A bitter thought touched Jessica in passing. The Count married his lady. Even as this thought flicked through her mind, she was bending to seek out the hidden message. It had to be there. The visible note contained the code phrase every Bene Gesserit not bound by a school injunction was required to give another Bene Gesserit when conditions demanded it. On that path lies danger. Jessica felt the back of the note, rubbed the surface for coded dots. Nothing. The edge of the pad came under her seeking fingers. Nothing. She replaced the pad where she had found it, feeling a sense of urgency. Something in the position of the pad? She wondered. But Howard had been over this room, doubtless had moved the pad. She looked at the leaf above the pad. The leaf! She brushed her finger along the undersurface, along the edge, along the stem. It was there. Her fingers detected the subtle coded dots, scanned them in a single passage. Your son and Duke are in immediate danger. A bedroom has been designed to attract your son. The H loaded it with death traps to be discovered, leaving one that may escape detection. Jessica put down the urge to run back to Paul. The full message had to be learned. Her fingers sped over the dots. I do not know the exact nature of the menace, but it has something to do with a bed. The threat to your Duke involves defection of a trusted companion or lieutenant. The H plan to give you as gift to a minion. To the best of my knowledge, this conservatory is safe. Forgive that I cannot tell more. My sources are few as my count is not in the pay of the H. In haste, MF. Jessica thrust a leaf aside, whirled to dash back to Paul. In the instant the airlock door slammed open, Paul jumped through it, holding something in his right hand, slammed the door behind him. He saw his mother, pushed through the leaves to her, glanced at the fountain, thrust his hand in the thing it clutched under the falling water. Paul! She grabbed his shoulder, staring at the hand. What is that? He spoke casually, but she caught the effort behind the tone. Hunter-seeker. Caught it in my room and smashed its nose, but I want to be sure. Water should short it out. Immerse it, she commanded. He obeyed. Presently she said, Withdraw your hand. Leave the thing in the water. He brought out his hand, shook water from it, staring at the quiescent metal in the fountain. Jessica broke off a plant stem, prodded the deadly silver. It was dead. She dropped the stem into the water, looked at Paul. His eyes studied the room with a searching intensity that she recognized. The BG way. This place could conceal anything, he said. I've reason to believe it's safe, she said. My room was supposed to be safe too. Howard said. It was a hunter-seeker, she reminded him. That means someone inside the house to operate it. Seeker control beams have limited range. The thing could have been spirited in here after Howard's investigation. But she thought of the message, of the leaf. Defection of a trusted companion or lieutenant. Not Howard, surely. Or surely not Howard. Howard's men are searching the house right now, he said. That seeker almost got the old woman who came to wake me. The shut-up Mapes, Jessica said, remembering the encounter at the stairs. A summons from your father to... That can wait, Paul said. Why do you think this room's safe? She pointed to the note, explained about it. He relaxed slightly, but Jessica remained inwardly tense, thinking, a hunter-seeker. Merciful mother. Took all her training to prevent a fit of hysterical trembling. Paul spoke matter-of-factly. It's the Harkonnens, of course. We shall have to destroy them. A rapping sounded at the airlock door, the code knock of one of Howard's corps. Come in, Paul called. The door swung wide and a tall man in a tradie's uniform, with a Howard insignia on his cap, leaned into the room. There you are, sir, he said. The housekeeper said you'd be here. He glanced around the room, found a can in the cellar, and caught a man in it. He had a seeker console. "I want to take part in the interrogation," Jessica said. "Sorry, my lady. We messed him up catching him. He died." "Nothing to identify him?" she asked. "We found nothing yet, my lady. Was he an Arakeen native?" Paul asked. Jessica nodded at the astuteness of the question. "He has the native look," the man said. "Put into that cairn more than a month ago, by the look, and left there to await our coming. Stone and mortar where he came through into the cellar were untouched when we inspected the place yesterday. I'll stake my reputation on it." "No one questions your thoroughness," Jessica said. "I question it, my lady. We should have used sonic probes down there." "I presume that's what you're doing now," Paul said. "Yes, sir. Send word to my father that we'll be delayed." "At once, sir." He glanced at Jessica. "It's how it's ordered that under such circumstances as these the young master be guarded in a safe place." Again his eyes swept the room. "What of this place?" "I've reason to believe it's safe," she said. "Both Howard and I have inspected it. Then I'll mount guard outside here, my lady, until we have been over the house once more." He bowed, touched his cap to Paul, backed out and swung the door closed behind him. Paul broke the sudden silence, saying, "Had we better go over the house later ourselves? Your eyes might see things others would miss." "This wing was the only place I hadn't examined," she said. "I put it off to last because Howard gave it his personal attention," he said. She darted a quick look at his face, questioning. Do you distrust Howard?" she asked. "No, but he's getting old. He's overworked. We could take some of the load from him. That'd only shame him and impair his efficiency," she said. "A stray insect won't be able to wander into this wing after he hears about it. He'll be shamed that. We must take our own measures," he said. "Howard has served 3 generations of Atreides with honor," she said. "He deserves every respect and trust we can pay him, many times over." Paul said, "My father is bothered by something you've done," he says. "B'nai Gesserit, like a swear word. What is it about me that bothers your father? When you argue with him, you are not your father, Paul." And Paul thought, it'll worry her, but I must tell her what that Mapes woman said about a traitor among us. "What are you holding back?" Jessica asked. "This isn't like you, Paul." He shrugged, recounted the exchange of Mapes. Jessica thought of the message of the leaf. She came to a sudden decision, showed Paul the leaf, told him its message. "My father must learn of this at once," he said. "I'll radiograph it in code and get it off." "No," she said. "You will wait until you can see him alone. As few as possible must learn about it." "Do you mean we should trust no one?" "There's another possibility," she said. "This message may have been meant to get to us. People who gave it to us may believe it's true, but it may be that the only purpose was to get this message to us." Paul's face remained sturdily somber. "So distrust and suspicion in our ranks, to weaken us that way," he said. "Must tell your father privately and caution him about this aspect of it," she said. "I understand." She turned to the tall reach of filter glass, stared out to the southwest where the sun of Arrakis was sinking, a yellowed ball low above the cliffs. Paul turned to her and said, "I don't think it's Howard either. Is it possible it's Yue?" "He's not a lieutenant or companion," she said, "and I can assure you he hates the Harkonnens as bitterly as we do." Paul directed his attention to the cliffs, thinking, and it couldn't be Gurney, or Duncan. Could be one of the sub-lieutenants? Impossible. They're all from families that have been loyal to us for generations, for good reason. Jessica rubbed her forehead, sensing her own fatigue. So much peril here. She looked out at the filter-yellowed landscape, studying it. Beyond the ducal grounds stretched a high-fenced storage yard. Lines of spy silos in it, with stilt-legged watchtowers standing around it like so many startled spiders. She could see at least 20 storage yards of silos reaching out to the cliffs of the shield wall. Silos repeated, stuttering across the basin. Slowly the filtered sun buried itself beneath the horizon. Stars leaped out. She saw one bright star so low on the horizon that it twinkled with a clear, precise rhythm, a trembling of light. Blink, 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 blink. Paul stood beside her in the dusky room, but Jessica concentrated on that single bright star, realizing that it was too low, but it must come from the shield wall cliffs. Someone signaling. She tried to read the message, but it was in no code she had ever learned. Other lights had come on down on the plain beneath the cliffs, little yellow spaced out against blue darkness, and one light off to their left grew brighter, began to wink back at the cliff. Very fast. Blink, squirt, glimmer, blink, and it was gone. The false star on the cliff winked out immediately. Signals, and they filled her with premonition. Why were lights used to signal across the basin, she asked herself. Why couldn't they use the communications network? The answer is obvious. The commitment was certain to be tapped now by agents of the Duke Leto. Light signals could only mean that messages were being sent between his enemies, between Harkonnen agents. There came a tapping at the door behind them, and the voice of Howard's man. "All clear, sir. Milady. Time to be getting the young master to his father." It is said that the Duke Leto blinded himself to the perils of Arrakis, but he walked heedlessly into the pit. Would it not be more likely to suggest he had lived so long in the presence of extreme danger he had misjudged a change in its intensity? Or is it possible he deliberately sacrificed himself that his son might find a better life? All evidence indicates the Duke was a man not easily hoodwinked. for Muad'Dib, family commentaries by the Princess Irulan. Duke Leto Atreides leaned against the parapet of the landing control tower outside Arrakeen. The night's first moon, on a plate silver coin, hung well above the southern horizon. Beneath it, the jagged cliffs of the shield wall shone like parched icing through a dust haze. To his left, the lights of Arrakeen glowed in the haze, yellow, white, blue. He thought of the notices posted now above his signature all through the populous places of the planet. Our sublime Padishah Emperor has charged me to take possession of this planet and end all dispute. The ritualistic formality of it touched him with a feeling of loneliness. Who was fooled by that fatuous legalism? Not the Fremen, certainly, nor the Houses Minor who controlled the interior trade of Arrakis, and were Harkonnen creatures almost to a man. They have tried to take the life of my son. The rage was difficult to suppress. He saw lights of a moving vehicle coming toward the landing field from Arrakeen. He hoped it was the garden troop carrier bringing Paul, but delay was galling even though he knew it was prompted by caution on the part of Howard's lieutenant. They have tried to take the life of my son. He shook his head to drive out the angry thoughts, glanced back at the field where 5 of his own frigates were posted around the rim like monolithic sentries. Better a cautious delay, then. The lieutenant was a good one, he reminded himself, a man marked for advancement, completely loyal, our sublime Padishah Emperor. Apparently, if the people of this decadent garrison city could only see the Emperor's private note to his noble duke, for disdainful allusions to veiled men and women, what else is one to expect of barbarians whose dearest dream is to live outside the ordered security of the Frafalushas? The Duke felt in this moment that his own dearest dream was to end all class distinctions and never again think of deadly order. He looked up and out of the dust at the unwinking stars, thought, around one of those little lights circles Caladan, but I'll never again see my home. The longing for Caladan was a sudden pain in his breast. He thought that it did not come from within himself, but that it reached out to him from Caladan. He could not bring himself to call this dry wasteland of Arrakis his home, and he doubted he ever would. I must mask my feelings, he thought, for the boy's sake. If ever he's to have a home, this must be it. I may think of Arrakis as a hell I've reached before death, but he must find here that which will inspire him. There must be something. A wave of self-pity, immediately despised and rejected, swept through him, and for some reason he found himself recalling 2 lines from a poem Gurney Halleck once often repeated. My lungs taste the air of time, blown past falling sands. Well, Gurney would find plenty of falling sands here, the Duke thought. The central wastelands beyond those moon-frosted cliffs were desert, barren rock, dunes, and blowing dust, an uncharted dry wilderness with here and there along its rim, and perhaps scattered through it knots of Fremen. If anything could buy a future for the Atreides line, the Fremen just might do it. The pride of the Harkonnens hadn't managed to infect even the Fremen with their poisonous schemes. They have tried to take the life of my son. A scraping metal racket vibrated through the tower, shook the parapet beneath his arms. Blast shutters dropped in front of him, blocking the view. Shuttles coming in, he thought. Time to go down and get to work. He turned to the stairs behind him, headed down to the big assembly room, trying to remain calm as he descended, to prepare his face for the coming encounter. They have tried to take the life of my son. The men were already boiling in form in from the field when he reached the yellow-domed room. They carried their space bags over their shoulders, shouting and roistering like students returning from vacation. Hey, feel it under your dogs? That's gravity, man. How many G's does this place pull? Feels heavy. 9/10 of a G by the book. The crossfire of thrown words filled the big room. Did you get a good look at this hole on the way down? Where's all the loot this place supposed to have? The Harkonnens took it with them. Me for a hot shower and a soft bed. Haven't you heard, stupid? No showers down here. You scrub your ass with sand. Hey, can it? The Duke. The Duke stepped out of the stair entry into the suddenly silent room. Gurney Halleck strode along at the point of the crowd, bag over one shoulder, the neck of his 9-string balisette clutched in the other hand. They were long-fingered hands with big thumbs full of tiny movements that drew to such delicate music from the balisette. The Duke watched Halleck, admiring the ugly lump of a man, noting the glass-splinter eyes with their gleam of savage understanding. Here was a man who lived outside the far-fresh Lucius, while obeying their every precept. What was it Paul called him? Gurney the Valorous. Halleck's wispy blonde hair trailed across barren spots on his head. His wide mouth was twisted into a pleasant sneer, and the scar of the ink-vine whip slashed across his jawline seemed to move with a life of its own. His whole air was of casual, shoulder-set capability. He came up to the Duke, bowed. Gurney, Leto said. My lord. He gestured with the balisette toward the men in the room. This is the last of them. I'd have preferred coming in with the first wave, but there are still some Harkonnens for you, the Duke said. Step aside with me, Gurney, where we may talk. Yours to command, my lord. They moved into an alcove beside a coin slot water machine, while the men stirred restlessly in the big room. Halleck dropped his bag into a corner, kept his grip on the balisette. How many men can you let Howard have? The Duke asked. Is Fufu in trouble, sire? He's lost only 2 agents, but his advanced men gave us an excellent line on the entire Harkonnen setup here. If we move fast, may gain a measure of security, the breathing space we require. He wants as many men as you can spare, men who won't balk at a little knife work. I can let him have 300 of my best, Halleck said. Where shall I send them? To the main gate. Howard has an agent there waiting to take them. Shall I get about it at once, sire? In a moment. We have another problem. The field commandant will hold the shuttle here until dawn on a pretext. The guild highliner that brought us is going on about its business, and the shuttle's supposed to make contact of a cargo ship taking up a load of spice. Our spice, my lord? Our spice. The shuttle also will carry some of the spice hunters from the old regime. They've opted to leave it with the change of fife and the judge of the changes allowing it. These are valuable workers, Gurney, about 800 of them. Before the shuttle leaves, you must persuade some of those men to enlist with us. How strong a persuasion, sire? I want their willing cooperation, Gurney. Those men have experience and skills we need. The fact that they're leaving suggests they're not part of the Harkonnen machine. Howard believes there could be some bad ones planted in the group, but he sees assassins in every shadow. Fever has found some very productive shadows in his time, my lord, and there are some he hasn't found, but I think planting sleepers in this outgoing crowd would show too much imagination for the Harkonnens. Possibly, sire. Where are these men? Down on the lower level, in a waiting room. I suggest you go down and play a tune or two to soften their minds, then turn on the pressure. You may offer positions of authority to those who qualify, offer 20% higher wages than they received under the Harkonnens. No more than that, sire? I know the Harkonnen pay scales, and some men of their termination pay in their pockets and the wanderlust on them. Well, sire, 20% would hardly seem improper inducement to stay. Leto spoke impatiently. Then use your own discretion in particular cases. Just remember that the treasury isn't bottomless. Hold it to 20% whenever you can. We particularly need spice drivers, weather scanners, dune men, any with open sand experience. I understand, sire. They shall come all for violence, their faces shall sup up as the east wind, they shall gather the captivity of the sand. A very moving quotation, the Duke said. Turn your crew over to a lieutenant. Have him give a short drill on water discipline, then bed the men down for the night in the barracks, adjoining the field. Field personnel will direct them. And don't forget the men for Howard. 300 of the best, sire. He took up his space bag. Where shall I report to you when I've completed my chores? I've taken over a council room topside here. We'll hold staff there. I want to arrange a new planetary dispersal order with armored squads going out first. Halleck stopped in the act of turning away, caught Leto's eye. Are you anticipating that kind of trouble, sire? I thought there was a judge of the change here. Both open battle and secret, the Duke said. There'll be blood aplenty spilled here before we're through. And the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land, Halleck quoted. The Duke sighed. Hurry back, Gurney. Very good, my lord. The whipscar rippled to his grin. Behold, as a wild ass in the desert, go I forth to my work. He turned, strode to the centre of the room, paused to relay his orders, hurried on through the men. Leto shook his head in retreating back. Halleck was a continual amusement, a head full of songs, quotations, and flowery phrases, and the heart of an assassin when it came to dealing with the Harkonnens. Presently, Leto took a leisurely diagonal course across to the lift, acknowledging salutes with a casual hand wave. He recognized a propaganda corps man, stopped to give him a message that could be relayed to the men through channels. Those who had brought their women would want to know their women were safe and where they could be found. The others would wish to know that the population here appeared to boast more women than men. The Duke slapped the propaganda man on the arm, a signal that the message had top priority to be put out immediately, then continued across the room. He nodded to the men, smiled, tracked pleasantries with the subaltern. Command must always look confident, he thought, all that faith riding on your shoulders while you sit in the critical seat and never show it. He breathed a sigh of relief when the lift swallowed him, and he could turn and face the impersonal doors. They have tried to take the life of my son. Over the exit of the Arrakeen landing field, crudely carved as though with a poor instrument, there was an inscription that Muad'Dib was to repeat many times. He saw it that first night on Arrakis, having been brought to the ducal command post to participate in his father's first full staff conference. The words of the inscription were a plea to those leaving Arrakis, but they fell with dark import on the eyes of a boy who had just escaped a close brush with death. They said, O you who know what we suffer here, do not forget us in your prayers. From Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. The whole theory of warfare is calculated risk, the Duke said. But when it comes to risking your own family, the element of calculation gets submerged in other things. He knew he wasn't holding in his anger as well as he should, and he turned, strode down the length of the long table and back. The Duke and Paul were alone in the conference room, at the landing field. It was an empty sounding room, furnished only with the long table, old-fashioned three-legged chairs around it, and a map-board and projector at one end. Paul sat at the table near the map-board. He had told his father the experience of the hunter-seeker and given the reports that a traitor threatened him. The Duke stopped across from Paul, pounded the table. "Howard told me that house was secure." Paul spoke hesitantly. "I was angry too, at first, and I blamed Howard, but the threat came from outside the house. It was simple, clever, and direct, and it would have succeeded were it not for the training given me by you and many others, including Howard." "Are you defending him?" the Duke demanded. "Yes. He's getting old. That's it. He should be. He's wise with much experience," Paul said. "How many of Howard's mistakes can you recall?" "I should be the one defending him," the Duke said. "Not you." Paul smiled. Leto sat down at the head of the table, put a hand over his son's. "You've matured lately, son." He lifted his hand. "It gladdens me." He matched his son's smile. "Howard will punish himself. He'll direct more anger against himself over this, and both of us together could pour on him." Paul glanced toward the darkened windows beyond the map board, looked at the night's blackness. Room lights reflected from a balcony railing out there. He saw movement and recognized the shape of a guard in a tradie's uniform. Paul looked back at the white wall behind his father, then down to the shiny surface of the table, seeing his own hands clenched into fists there. The door opposite the Duke banged open. Fufa Howard strode through it, looking older and more leathery than ever. He paced down the length of the table, stopped at attention facing Leto. "My lord," he said, speaking to a point over Leto's head, "I have just learned how I failed you. It becomes necessary that I tender my I'll sit down and stop acting the fool," the Duke said. He waved to the chair across from Paul. "If you made a mistake, it was in overestimating the Harkonnens. Their simple minds came up with a simple trick. We didn't count on simple tricks. My son has been at great pains to point out to me, but he came through this largely because of your training. You didn't fail there." He tapped at the back of the empty chair. "Sit down, I say." Howard sank into the chair. "But I'll hear no more of it," the Duke said. "The incident is past. We have more pressing business. Where are the others?" "I asked them to wait outside while I call them in." Howard looked into Leto's eyes. "Sire, I know who my true friends are, Fufa," the Duke said. "Call in the men." Howard swallowed. "At once, my lord." He swiveled in the chair, called to the open door. "Gurney, bring them in." Halleck led the file of men into the room, the staff officers looking grimly serious, followed by the younger aides and specialists, an air of eagerness among them. Brief scuffling sounds echoed around the room as the men took seats. A faint smell of rashag stimulant wafted down the table. "There's coffee for those who want it," the Duke said. He looked over his men, thinking, "They're a good crew. A man could do far worse for this kind of war." He waited while coffee was brought in from the adjoining room and served, noting the tiredness in some of the faces. Presently he put on his mask of quiet efficiency, stood up and commanded their attention to a knuckle rap against the table. "Well, gentlemen," he said, "our civilization appears to have fallen so deeply into the habit of invasion that we cannot even obey a simple order of the Imperium without the old ways cropping up." Dry chuckles sounded around the table, and Paul realized that his father had said the precisely correct thing in precisely the correct tone to lift the mood here. Even the hint of fatigue in his voice was right. "I think first we'd better learn if Fufa has anything to add to his report on the Fremen," the Duke said. "Fufa?" Howard glanced up. "I have some economic matters to go into after my general report, sire, but I can say now that the Fremen appear more and more to be the allies we need. They are waiting now to see if they can trust us. They appear to be dealing openly. They've sent us a gift, still suits of their own manufacture, maps of certain desert areas surrounding strong points the Harkonnens left behind." He glanced down the table. "Their intelligence reports have proved completely reliable, and they've helped us considerably in our dealings with the Judge of the Change. They've also sent some incidental things, jewelry for the Lady Jessica, spice liquor, candy, medicinals. My men are processing a lot right now. There appears to be no trickery." "You like these people, Fufa?" asked a man down the table. Howard turned to face his questioner. "Duncan Idaho says they're to be admired." Paul glanced at his father, back to Howard, ventured a question. "Have you any new information on how many Fremen there are?" Howard looked at Paul. "From food processing and other evidence, Idaho estimates the cave complex he visited consisted of some 10,000 people, all told. The leader said he ruled a siege of 2,000 hearths. We've reason to believe there are a great many such siege communities. All seem to give their allegiance to someone called Liet." "That's something new," Leto said. "Could be an error on my part, sire. There are things to suggest this Liet may be a local deity." Another man down the table cleared his throat, asked, "Is it certain they deal with the smugglers? A smuggler caravan left this siege while Idaho was there, carrying a heavy load of spice. They used pack beasts and indicated they faced an 18-day journey." "It appears," the Duke said, "that the smugglers have redoubled their operations during this period of unrest. This deserves some careful thought. We shouldn't worry too much about unlicensed frigates working off our planet. It's always done, but to have them completely outside our observation, that's not good. You have a plan, sire? Howard asked. The Duke looked at Halleck. Gurney, I want you to head a delegation, an embassy if you will, to contact these romantic businessmen. Tell them I'll ignore their operations as long as they give me a ducal tariff. Howard here estimates that graft and extra fighting men heretofore required in their operations have been costing them 4 times that amount. What if the Emperor gets wind of this? Halleck asked. He's very jealous of his trowing profits, my lord. Leto smiled. We'll bank the entire tariff openly in the name of Shaddam IV and deduct it legally from our levy support costs. Let the Harkonnens fight that. We'll be ruining a few more of the locals who grew fat under the Harkonnen system. No more graft. A grin twisted Halleck's face. Ah, my lord, a beautiful low blow. Would that I could see the Baron's face when he learns of this. The Duke turned to Howard. Fufa, did you get those account books you said you could buy? Yes, my lord. They're being examined in detail even now. I've skimmed them, though, and can give a first approximation. Give it, then. The Harkonnens took 10 billion Solaris out of here every 330 standard days. A muted gasp ran around the table. Even the younger aides, who had been betraying some boredom, sat up straighter and exchanged wide-eyed looks. Halleck murmured, For they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of the treasure hid in the sand. You see, gentlemen, Leto said, is there anyone here so naive he believes the Harkonnens have quietly packed up and walked away from all this merely because the Emperor ordered it? There was a general shaking of heads, murmurous agreement. We'll have to take it at the point of the sword, Leto said. He turned to Howard. This would be a good point to report on equipment. How many sandcrawlers, harvesters, spice factories, and their supporting equipment have they left us? A full complement, as it says in the Imperial Inventory audited by the Judge of the Change, my lord, Howard said. He gestured for an aide to pass him a folder, opened the folder on the table in front of him, but neglected to mention that less than half the crawlers are operable, but only about a third have carryalls to fly them to spice sands, that everything the Harkonnens left us is ready to break down and fall apart. We'll be lucky to get half the equipment into operation, and luckier yet if a fourth of it's still working 6 months from now, pretty much as we expected, Leto said. What's the firm estimate on basic equipment? Howard glanced at his folder. About 930 harvester factories that can be sent out in a few days. About 250 ornithopters for survey, scouting, and weather observation. Carryalls, a little under 1,000. Halleck said, Wouldn't it be cheaper to reopen negotiations with the Guild for permission to orbit a frigate as a weather satellite? The Duke looked at Howard. Nothing new there, eh, Fufa? We must pursue other avenues for now, Howard said. The Guild agent wasn't really negotiating with us. He was merely making it plain, one meant to another, that the price was out of our reach and would remain so no matter how long a reach we develop. Our task is to find out why before we approach him again. One of Halleck's aides down the table swiveled in his chair, snapped. There's no justice in this. Justice? The Duke looked at the man. Who asks for justice? We make our own justice. We make it here on Arrakis, win or die. Do you regret casting your lot with us, sir? The man stared at the Duke, then. No, sire. You couldn't turn down the richest planetary source of income in our universe, and I could do naught but follow you. Forgive the outburst, but, he shrugged, we must all feel bitter at times. Bitterness I can understand, the Duke said, but let us not rail about justice as long as we have arms and the freedom to use them. Do any of the rest of you harbour bitterness? If so, let it out. This is friendly counsel where any man may speak his mind. Halleck stirred, said, I think what rankles, sire, is that we've had no volunteers from the other great houses. They address you as Leto the Just and promise eternal friendship, but only as long as it doesn't cost them anything. They don't know yet who's going to win this exchange, the Duke said. Most of the houses have grown fat by taking few risks. One cannot truly blame them for this. One can only despise them. He looked at Howard. We were discussing equipment. Would you care to project a few examples to familiarize the men with this machinery? Howard nodded, gestured to an aide at the projector. A Solido Tri-D projection appeared on the table surface about a third of the way down from the Duke. Some of the men farther along the table stood up to get a better look at it. Paul leaned forward, staring at the machine. Sealed against the tiny projected human figures around it, the thing was about 120 meters long and about 40 meters wide. It was basically a long bug-like body moving on independent sets of wide tracks. This is a harvester factory, Howard said. We chose one in good repair for this projection. There's one dragline outfit that came in with the first team of Imperial ecologists, though, and it's still running, for I don't know how or why. If that's the one they call Old Maria, it belongs in a museum, an aide said. I think the Harkonnens kept it as a punishment job, a threat hanging over their workers' heads. Be good or you'll be assigned to Old Maria. Chuckles sounded around the table. Paul held himself apart from the humour, his attention focused on the projection and the question that filled his mind. He pointed to the image on the table, said, Fufa, are their sandworms big enough to swallow that whole? A quick silence settled on the table. The Duke cursed under his breath, then thought, No, They have to face the realities here. There are worms in the deep desert could take this entire factory in one gulp, Howard said. Up here closer to the shield wall, where most of the spicing's done, there are plenty of worms that could cripple this factory and devour it at their leisure. Why don't we shield them? Paul asked. According to Idaho's report, Howard said, shields are dangerous in the desert. A body-sized shield will call every worm for hundreds of meters around. It appears to drive them into a killing frenzy. We have the Fremen word on this and no reason to doubt it. Idaho saw no evidence of shield equipment at the siege. None at all? Paul asked. It'd be pretty hard to conceal that kind of thing among several thousand people, Howard said. Idaho had free access to every part of the siege. He saw no shields or any indication of their use. It's a puzzle, the Duke said. The Harkonnens certainly used plenty of shields here, Howard said. They had repair depots in every garrison village, and their accounts show a heavy expenditure for shield replacements and parts. Could the Fremen have a way of nullifying shields? Paul asked. It doesn't seem likely, Howard said. It's theoretically possible, of course. A shy-sized static countercharge is supposed to do the trick, but no one's ever been able to put it to the test. We'd have heard about it before now, Halleck said. The smugglers have close contact with the Fremen and would have acquired such a device if it were available, and they'd have had no inhibitions against marketing it off-planet. I don't like an unanswered question of this importance, Leto said. Fufa, I want you to give top priority to solution of this problem. We're already working on it, my lord. He cleared his throat. Idaho did say one thing. He said you couldn't mistake the Fremen attitude towards shields. He said they were mostly amused by them. The Duke frowned then. The subject under discussion is spicing equipment. Howard gestured to his aide at the projector. The solito image of the harvester factory was replaced by a projection of a winged device that dwarfed the images of human figures around it. This is a carryall, Howard said. It's essentially a large fopter whose sole function is to deliver a factory to spice-rich sands, then to rescue the factory when a sandworm appears. They always appear. Harvesting the spice is a process of getting in and getting out as much as possible. Admirably suited to Harkonnen morality, the Duke said. Laughter was abrupt and too loud. An ornithopter replaced the carryall in the projection focus. Though these thopters are fairly conventional, Howard said, major modifications give them extended range. Extra care has been used in sealing essential areas against sand and dust. Only about 1 in 30 is shielded, possibly discarding the shield generator's weight for greater range. I don't like this de-emphasis on shields, the Duke muttered. And he thought, is this the Harkonnen secret? Does it mean we won't ever even be able to escape on shielded frigates if all goes against us? He shook his head sharply to drive out such thoughts, said, let's get to the working estimate. What'll our profit figure be? Howard turned 2 pages in his notebook. After assessing the repairs and operable equipment, we've worked out a first estimate on operating costs. It's based naturally on a depreciated figure for a clear safety margin. He closed his eyes in mentat semitrance, said, under the Harkonnens, maintenance and salaries were held to 14%. We'd be lucky to make it at 30% at first. With free investment and growth factors accounted for, including the charm percentage and military costs, our profit margin will be reduced to a very narrow 6 or 7% till we can replace worn-out equipment. We then should be able to boost it up to 12 or 15% where it belongs. He opened his eyes. Unless my lord wishes to adopt Harkonnen methods. We're working for a solid and permanent planetary base, the Duke said. We have to keep a large percentage of the people happy, especially the Fremen. Most especially the Fremen, Howard agreed. Our supremacy on Caladan, the Duke said, depended on sea and air power. Here we must develop something I choose to call desert power. This may include air power, but it's possible it may not. I call your attention to the lack of Thopter shields. He shook his head. The Harkonnens relied on turnover from off-planet for some of their key personnel. We don't dare. Each new lot would have its quota of provocateurs. And we'll have to be content with far less profit and a reduced harvest, Howard said. Our output the first 2 seasons should be down a third from the Harkonnen average. There it is, the Duke said. Exactly as we expected. We'll have to move fast with the Fremen. I'd like 5 full battalions of Fremen troops before the first charm ordered. That's not much time, sire, Howard said. We don't have much time, as you well know. They'll be in here with Sardaukar disguised as Harkonnens at the first opportunity. How many do you think they'll ship in, Fufa? 4 or 5 battalions all told, sire. No more, guild troop transport costs being what they are. Then 5 battalions of Fremen plus our own forces ought to do it. Let us have a few captive Sardaukar to parade in front of the Landsraad Council, and matters will be much different, profits or no profits. We'll do our best, sire. Paul looked at his father, back to Hawat, suddenly conscious of the Mentat's great age. Whoever the old man had served 3 generations of Atreides. Aged. It showed in the rheumy shine of the brown eyes, in the cheeks cracked and burned by exotic rever, in the rounded curve of shoulders and the thin set of the lips, with the cranberry-coloured stain of sappho juice. So much depends on one aged man, Paul thought. We're presently in a war of assassins, the Duke said, but it has not achieved full scale. Further, what's the condition of the Harkonnen machine here? We've eliminated 259 of their key people, my lord. No more than 3 Harkonnen cells remain, perhaps 100 people in all. These Harkonnen creatures you eliminated, the Duke said, were they propertied? Most were well situated, my lord, in the entrepreneur class. I want you to forge certificates of allegiance over the signatures of each of them, the Duke said. File copies of the Judge of the Change. Will take the legal position that they stayed under false allegiance, confiscate their property, take everything, turn out their families, strip them, and make sure the Crown gets its 10%. It must be entirely legal. Fufa smiled, revealing red-stained teeth beneath the carmine lips. A move worthy of your grandsire, my lord. It shames me I didn't think of it first. Halleck frowned across the table, surprised a deep scowl on Paul's face. The others were smiling and nodding. It's wrong, Paul thought. This will make the others fight all the harder. They have nothing to gain by surrendering. He knew the actual no-holds-barred convention that ruled in Canley, but this was the sort of move that could destroy them, even as it gave them victory. I have been a stranger in a strange land, Halleck quoted. Paul stared at him, recognizing the quotation from the OC Bible, wondering, is Gurney too, wishing into devious plots? The Duke glanced at the darkness out the windows, looked back at Halleck. Gurney, how many of those sand workers did you persuade to stay with us? 286 in all, sire. I think we should take them and consider ourselves lucky. They're all in useful categories. No more? The Duke pursed his lips then. Well past the word along to. A disturbance at the door interrupted him. Duncan Idaho came through the guard there, hurried down the length of the table and bent over the Duke's ear. Leto waved him back, said, Speak out, Duncan. You can see this is strategy stuff. Paul studied Idaho, marking the feline movements, the swiftness of reflex that made him such a difficult weapons teacher to emulate. Idaho's dark round face turned toward Paul, the cave-seared eyes giving no hint of recognition, but Paul recognized the mask of serenity over excitement. Idaho looked down the length of the table, said, We've taken a force of Harkonnen mercenaries disguised as Fremen. The Fremen themselves sent us a courier to warn us of the false band. In the attack, however, we found the Harkonnens had waylaid the Fremen courier, badly wounded him. We were bringing him here for treatment by our medics when he died. I'd seen how badly off the man was and stopped to do what I could. I surprised him in the attempt to throw something away. Idaho glanced at Leto. A knife, my lord, a knife, the like of which you've never seen. Christ knife? Someone asked. No doubt of it, Idaho said, milky white and glowing with a light of its own like. He reached into his tunic, brought out a sheath with a black-ridged handle protruding from it. Keep that blade in its sheath. The voice came from the open door at the end of the room, a vibrant and penetrating voice that brought them all up, staring. A tall robed figure stood in the door, barred by the crossed swords of the guard. A light tan robe completely enveloped the man except for a gap in the hood and black veil that exposed eyes of total blue, no white in them at all. Let him enter, Idaho whispered. Past that man, the Duke said. The guards hesitated, then lowered their swords. The man swept into the room, stood across from the Duke. This is Stilgar, chief of the siege I visited, leader of those who warned us of the false band, Idaho said. Welcome, sir, Leto said. And why shouldn't we unsheathe this blade? Stilgar glanced at Idaho, said, You observe the customs of cleanliness and honour among us. I would permit you to see the blade of the man you befriended. His gaze swept the others in the room, but I do not know these others. Would you have them defile an honourable weapon? I am the Duke Leto, the Duke said. Would you permit me to see this blade? I'll permit you to earn the right to unsheath it, Stilgar said, and, as a mutter of protest sounded around the table, he raised a thin, darkly veined hand. I remind you this is the blade of one who befriended you. In the waiting silence, Paul studied the man, sensing the aura of power that radiated from him. He was a leader, a Fremen leader. A man at the centre of the table across from Paul muttered, Who's he to tell us what rights we have on Arrakis? It is said that the Duke Leto Atreides rules with the consent of the governed, the Fremen said. Thus I must tell you the way it is with us. A certain responsibility falls on those who have seen a Christ knife. He passed a dark glance across Idaho. They are ours. They may never leave Arrakis without our consent. Halleck and several of the others started to rise, angry expressions on their faces. Halleck said, For Duke Leto determines whether— One moment, please, Leto said, and the very mildness of his voice held them. This must not get out of hand, he thought. He addressed himself to the Fremen. Sir, I honour and respect the personal dignity of any man who respects my dignity. I am indeed indebted to you, and I always pay my debts. If it is your custom that this knife remains sheathed here, then it is so ordered by me, and if there is any other way we may honour the man who died in our service, you have but to name it. The Fremen stared at the Duke, then slowly pulled aside his veil, revealing a thin nose and a full-lipped mouth and a glistening blade beard. Deliberately he bent over the end of the table, spat on its polished surface. As the men around the table started to surge to their feet, Idaho's voice boomed across the room. "Hold!" Into the sudden charged stillness, Idaho said, "We thank you, Stilgar, for the gift of your body's moisture. We accept it in the spirit with which it is given." And Idaho spat on the table in front of the Duke. Aside to the Duke, he said, "Remember how precious water is here, sire. That was a token of respect." Leto sank back into his chair, caught Paul's eye, a rueful grin on his son's face, sensed a slow relaxation of tension around the table as understanding came to his men. The Fremen looked at Idaho, said, "You measured well in my siege, Duncan Idaho. Is there a bond on your allegiance to your Duke?" "He's asking me to enlist with him, sire," Idaho said. "Would you accept a dual allegiance?" Leto asked. "You wish me to go with him, sire?" "I wish you to make your own decision in the matter," Leto said, and he could not keep the urgency out of his voice. Idaho studied the Fremen. "Would you have me under these conditions, Stilgar? There'd be times when I'd have to return to serve my Duke. You fight well, and you did your best for our friend," Stilgar said. He looked at Leto. "Let it be thus. The man Idaho keeps the Christ knife he holds as a mark of allegiance to us. He must be cleansed, of course, and the rites observed, but this can be done. He will be Fremen and soldier of the Atreides. There is precedent for this. Liet serves two masters." "Duncan?" Leto asked. "I understand, sire," Idaho said. "It is agreed, then," Leto said. "Your water is ours, Duncan Idaho," Stilgar said. "The body of our friend remains with your Duke. His water is Atreides' water. It is a bond between us." Leto sighed, glanced at Howard, catching the old Mentat's eye. Howard nodded, his expression pleased. "I will await below," Stilgar said, "while Idaho makes farewell with his friends. Turok was the name of our dead friend. Remember that when it comes time to release his spirit. You are friends of Turok." Stilgar started to turn away. "Will you not stay a while?" Leto asked. The Fremen turned back, whipping his veil into place with a casual gesture, adjusting something beneath it. Paul glimpsed what looked like a thin tube before the veil settled into place. "Is there a reason to stay? Is there reason to stay?" the Fremen asked. "We would honor you," the Duke said. "Honor requires that I be elsewhere, soon," the Fremen said. He shot another glance at Idaho, whirled and strode out past the door guards. "If the other Fremen match him, we'll serve each other well," Leto said. Idaho spoke in a dry voice. "He's a fair sample, sire. You understand what you're to do, Duncan? I'm your ambassador to the Fremen, sire. Much depends on you, Duncan. We're going to need at least 5 battalions of those people before the Sardaukar descend on us. This is going to take some doing, sire. The Fremen are a pretty independent bunch." Idaho hesitated. Then, "And sire, there's one other thing. One of the mercenaries we knocked over was trying to get this blade from our dead Fremen friend. The mercenary says there's a Harkon and reward of 1,000,000 Solaris for anyone who bring in a single Christ knife." Leto's chin came up in a movement of obvious surprise. "Why do they want one of those blades so badly?" "The knife is ground from a sandworm's tooth. It's the mark of the Fremen, sire. With it, a blue-eyed man could penetrate any siege in the land. They'd question me unless I were known. I don't look Fremen, but—" "Peter de Vries," the Duke said. "Man of devilish cunning, my lord," Howard said. Idaho slipped the sheathed knife beneath his tunic. "Guard that knife," the Duke said. "I understand, my lord." He patted the transceiver on his belt kit. "I'll report soon as possible. Fufa has my call code. Use battle language." He saluted, spun about, and hurried after the Fremen. They heard his footsteps drumming down the corridor. A look of understanding passed between Leto and Howard. They smiled. "We've much to do, sire," Halleck said. "And I keep you from your work," Leto said. "I have the report on the advanced bases," Howard said. "Shall I give it another time, sire? Will it take long?" "Not for a briefing. It's said among the Fremen that there were more than 200 of these advanced bases built here on Arrakis during the Desert Botanical Testing Station period. All supposedly have been abandoned, but there are reports they were sealed off before being abandoned." "Equipment in them?" the Duke asked. "According to the reports I have from Duncan." "Where are they located?" Halleck said. "The answer to that question," Howard said, "is invariably, Liet knows." "God knows," Leto muttered. "Perhaps not, sire," Howard said. "You heard this Stilgar use his name. Could he have been referring to a real person?" "Serving two masters," Halleck said. "It sounds like a religious quotation." "And you should know," the Duke said. Halleck smiled. "This judge of the change," Leto said. "The imperial ecologist, Kynes. Wouldn't he know where those bases are?" "Sire," Howard cautioned, "this Kynes is an imperial servant, and he's a long way from the Emperor," Leto said. "I want those bases. They'd be loaded with materials we could salvage and use for repair of our working equipment." "Sire," Howard said, "those bases are still legally His Majesty's fief. Whoever he is savage enough to destroy anything," the Duke said. "We can always blame the weather. Get this Kynes and at least find out if the bases exist." "'Twere dangerous to commandeer them," Howard said. Duncan was clear on one thing. Those bases or the idea of them hold some deep significance for the Fremen. We might alienate the Fremen if we took those bases. Paul looked at the faces of the men around them, saw the intensity of the way they followed every word. They appeared deeply disturbed by his father's attitude. "Listen to him, father," Paul said in a low voice. "He speaks truth." "Sire," Howard said, "those bases could give us material to repair every piece of equipment left us, yet be beyond reach for strategic reasons. It'd be rash to move without greater knowledge. This kind has arbiter authority from the Imperium. We mustn't forget that, and the Fremen defer to him." "Do it gently, then," the Duke said. "I wish to know only if those bases exist." "As you will, sire." Howard sat back, lowered his eyes. "All right, then," the Duke said. "We know what we have ahead of us. Work. We've been trained for it. We've some experience in it. We know what the rewards are, and the alternatives are clear enough. You all have your assignments." He looked at Halleck. "Gurney, take care of that smuggler situation first." "I shall go unto the rebellious that dwell in the dry land," Halleck intoned. "Some day I'll catch that man without a quotation, and he'll look undressed," the Duke said. Chuckles echoed around the table, but Paul heard the effort in them. The Duke turned to Howard. "Set up another command post for intelligence and communications on this floor, Fufa. When you have them ready, I'll want to see you." Howard arose, glanced around the room as though seeking support. He turned away, led the procession out of the room. The others moved hurriedly, scraping their chairs along the floor, balling up in little knots of confusion. It ended in confusion, Paul thought, staring at the backs of the last men to leave. Always before, Staff had ended on an incisive air. This meeting had just seemed to trickle out, worn down by its own inadequacies, and with an argument to top it off. For the first time, Paul allowed himself to think about the real possibility of defeat, not thinking about it out of fear or because of warnings such as that of the old Reverend Mother, but facing up to it because of his own assessment of the situation. "My father is desperate," he thought. "Things aren't going well for us at all." And Howard. Paul recalled how the old man had acted during the conference. Subtle hesitations, signs of unrest. Howard was deeply troubled by something. "Best you remain here the rest of the night, son," the Duke said. "It'll be dawn soon anyway. I'll inform your mother." He got to his feet slowly, stiffly. "Why don't you pull a few of these chairs together and stretch out on them for some rest?" "I'm not very tired, sir." "As you will." The Duke folded his hands behind him and began pacing up and down the length of the table. Like a caged animal, Paul thought. "Are you going to discuss the traitor possibility with Howard?" Paul asked. The Duke stopped across from his son, spoke to the dark windows. "You've discussed the possibility many times. The old woman seems so sure of herself," Paul said. And the message, mother, precautions have been taken," the Duke said. He looked around the room, and Paul marked the hunted wildness in his father's eyes. "Remain here. There are some things about the command posts I want to discuss with Fufa." He turned, strode out of the room, nodding shortly to the door guards. Paul stared at the place where his father had stood. The space had been empty even before the Duke had left the room, and he recalled the old woman's warning. For the father, nothing.